So welcome to the session on arts and culture. And as you know by now, those of you who have attended the session, the conference for the last couple of days, that we're trying to inspire small communities in taking charge of themselves and giving you ideas of what you may be able to take back to your community and try to instill in your community, move it forward in order for, with the resources available, of course, that's a key piece, especially for a lot of our smaller communities, in trying to move our communities forward. So we're going to focus, and the whole conference was focusing on small economies, intrinsic value of communities, how we can work from within the community to develop the community, whether it's cultural, as we'll talk about this afternoon, arts, ecological or environmental. It's all important to our communities, and what's important are sustainable communities. So this afternoon, we'll look at moving our communities forward through the lens of arts and culture. And as I mentioned to the group this morning, the instructions when they asked me to be moderator was to talk about placemaking and how placemaking was going to be a core, at the core of this panel's discussion. And I have to admit, I had to quickly rush and see what placemaking was. And then when I saw what it was, I thought, oh, well, I've been doing that for years in our Acadian community especially. So a little bit of background on myself, Allister, Surette. I'm president and vice-chancellor at St. Anne's University. So my office is an hour away from here in Church Point, where our main campus is. We have 4 other campuses in the province, and mostly in the Acadian communities. So I've been working very closely with smaller rural, we call it remote communities now, remote from Halifax or from a main airport anyway, southwestern Nova Scotia. So I know what it's all about in economic development, arts and culture, working with the Acadian community. And I've also been with government as an MLA and as a minister, and then involved in many other economic development agencies, including I'm chairing the new REN, the Regional Enterprise Network for Western Nova Scotia now, amongst other things that I've been doing. So a little bit about my background. So coming back to this placemaking, if you're like me, what is this placemaking all about? So a quick research, just read you a couple passages here from what I found. I think that explained it fairly well, what placemaking is. These people, of course, our panelists all knew what placemaking was all about. It's a quiet movement that reimagines public spaces as the heart of every community. It's a transformative approach that inspires people to create and improve their public places. Placemaking strengthens the connection between people and the places they share. Rooted in community-based participation, placemaking involves the planning, design, management and programming of public spaces. An effective placemaking process capitalizes on local communities' assets, inspiration, and potential, ultimately creating good public spaces that promote people's health, happiness, and well-being. So having said that, placemaking, place can be used in different ways. It can be a physical place, as we'll hear today, one example. And again, these are just examples to inspire you to do things in your own community, or obviously move forward with what the presentations are all about. So it could be a physical place, such as this building, and what you do with it moving forward. Or it can be a virtual space, or place, as we'll hear, technology virtual, I mean. Or it can be virtual in the sense that it's a project within your community that you work intrinsically with what's in the community to move the community forward. So we'll try to learn a little bit more what that means more practically with the examples here. So the key concepts of the art and culture economy, this session here today, is to identify authentic cultural assets that define a community as a place, respecting the intrinsic value of these assets as an inherent community strength, supporting emergent creativity through youth, and we'll hear that today in part by sharing and regenerating stories, and using economic tools to support art and culture markets within the community. And there's different ways of doing this. Those of you who may have participated at the topic table, you can do these through hubs or makeries or incubators or digital technology, as we'll hear, mapping, festivals. There's all kinds of ways that you can move arts and culture forward using economic tools in our communities, and there's a number of examples that the topic table will have as well. So, not about myself. I'm here to moderate and hopefully try to keep the discussion going. And if you've participated in the other ones, I'm probably the same format. We'll give each panelist some time. And last session we had 20 minutes or so at the end, so there was questions, and that was the session. So we'll try to do the same thing this afternoon. Now that we have one session under our belt, we have a little bit of practice. We should be a little bit smoother as to how the session's going to roll out, but we'll wait and see. So 3 of our panelists are going to talk about storytelling and how storytelling can be an asset to your community and how to move it forward. A little bit of mapping in there as well, a very interesting project. And then the 4th panelist of how we can reutilize infrastructure within our communities as an art and culture hub. So we'll start with Marlene Ivy. She's going to focus on a prototype of cultural identity for communities to illustrate intrinsic assets. Marlene is associate professor at NASCAD, independent design consultant as well. Her current research is footed in the Gaelic milieu, where she collaborated with the Nova Scotia Gaelic community to create an interactive online social space for Gaelic language acquisition and cultural restoration. Marlene?
Susan Witt said this morning that every movement needs a history to have a future. I would like to introduce the phenomenon of Gaelic cultural restoration that is currently taking place in Nova Scotia and tell the story of Andrakit Esrin, which translated means the bridge between us, which is an online social learning and meeting place steeped in authentic Nova Scotia Gaelic traditions that include storytelling, song, music, dance, folklore, wisdom system, and weather lore. A little bit later on, I'm going to talk about the infrastructure that we established to enable us to do this and where the funding came from. But I'll just go on at this point and tell you that Nova Scotia culture, Gaelic culture, has shown a remarkable tenacity for survival at community-based levels and may provide some inspirational models for community initiatives in other regions of the province. Questions emerge. For example, how did Gaels maintain the domains of their cultural expression? Are there lessons to be learned about cultural integrity and authenticity? Is it possible to convey cultural meaning so that it resonates in our present society? Do communities have the capacity and the capability to undertake such endeavors? How will it change what is already there, and what value will it bring? Gaelic language as a family choice in Cape Breton began to fade in earnest during the 1920s. Cape Breton Gaelic traditions by this time were evident for the most part in the generation born in the 1920s and loosely distributed throughout communities in rural Cape Breton. Hundreds of native speakers remained in that period of decline where previously there had been thousands. Beginning around 1940, the cavalry rode in. The Gaelic tradition in Nova Scotia was the subject of scholarly investigation. Field workers, folklorists, linguists, and ethnographers appeared regularly, most notably in Cape Breton Island, to record Gaelic dialects and folklore. Regional differences exist even today in the dialect, but also in dance. For example, you can go to a dance in Inverness County or Victoria County, and there will be a square set that is specific to that region. And more recently, Halifax Regional Municipality has put forward the Halifax set. And if you go to St. Agnes Church on any night that they have the family dance, you will be surrounded by young children, teenagers, and adults who are all dancing together. And I greatly admire the person who keeps them all right, so that at the end of the night, everybody's dancing the right steps in the right order. As I said, the scholarly investigation was going on, but what is most interesting is that members of the Gaelic community compiled private collections and recorded at local occasions. And all of this combined to create a considerable audio and sometimes video resource of regional Cape Breton representation in Nova Scotia. Paralleling this scholarly and community-based archiving, the Gaelic community advocated on its own behalf, organized itself, pushed to restore the place of Gaels in Nova Scotia's cultural landscape, and gave serious consideration to transmitting traditional culture as a factor in its future survival. The value that the Gaelic community placed on their culture was phenomenal, and they challenged the absence of Gaelic from meaningful representation and the systemic undermining of their cultural identity. Evidence that Gaelic was gaining ground between 1978 and 1982 with a Canadian Secretary of State grant, Dr. John Shaw, with collaboration, cooperation, and a great deal of kindness from the Gaelic community, tradition bearers, collected a substantive archive of oral and musical traditions of the Gaelic community, which became the Cape Breton Gaelic Folklore Collection, which is titled Stuna Gael, and is at St. Yves University in Antigonish. It's online, actually. The Shaw collection exemplifies the social environment with which Gaelic knowledge was shared. For example, Joe Neil McNeil, who died in 1996 and was a great tradition bearer, I'm going to give you the English translation, discussed or related how a ceilidh worked. This is a wonderful example of placemaking in the form of the ceilidh or visit. I'm going to read, quote, "There were those who excelled at singing songs, and people who excelled at reciting poems, and people who were outstanding storytellers, as well as those who were good musicians and dancers. So they had what I consider to be the very best entertainment. I mentioned before, they used to have everything that these electronic devices supply us with today and more. And in my view, the extra was that you were listening to the people who were entertaining you there, whether it was playing music or singing or rhymes that they were reading or songs, and whether they were doing a dance for you to watch. You were there alive with them in the flesh and participating in the whole event." In the Gaelic milieu, ceilidh house meetings have evolved as a participatory method for bringing community representatives together to develop concepts and ideas for cultural restoration. In 2008, the Gaelic community members organized a one-day ceilidh house meeting referred to as Storas na Gael to explore possible applications for the Cape Breton Gaelic folklore collection. To these community members, it became apparent that there was need for some interface to be established between the remaining tradition bearers, the collected and archived materials, and an entire generation of Gaelic community who were, in essence, culturally orphaned. Consequently, Storas na Gael aimed to generate and record ideas for how the collections might emerge from the archives and be returned to the public domain so that community-based Gaelic learners could engage with native cultural expression of Gaelic Nova Scotia, the art forms, and its aesthetic features. The concept for Storas Avala, which translated are community treasures, a 4-day-long annual Gaelic immersion folklife school at the Nova Scotia Highland Village, emerged from this Gaelic house discussion. And this is, I think, 2014, Storas na Gael, Storas Avala. Storas Avala brings native Gaelic speakers and learners together in immersive and interactive social environment. People tell stories, sing songs, play tunes, and dance. Inspiration is garnered from archived cultural knowledge, explored in a contemporary environment where it resonates in spontaneity and conviviality, with the past and present melded together in wholeness over space and time. This is an important quality of Gaelic tradition. The language, songs, and stories extend over many generations. However, they are of an ageless quality, alive, present, and rich. In Storas Avala, cultural values are transmitted, resonating in identity. This is who we are. In 2010, we proposed a prototype Storas Avala as an interactive website. The Gaelic community is distributed over wide areas, so we looked at the technology as a way of bringing these communities together in dialogue. Year-round, not just during the summer for Storas Avala. So Andrakich Eterin is Storas Avala all year round. In 2010, this is the website, Andrakich Eterin, The Bridge Between Us, is a virtual experience designed to emulate the social reality of Nova Scotia Gaelic culture. Generational conviviality is enhanced and authenticity is maintained as Gaels from the past joined with Gaels of the present through a technology that spans time, place, and space in an unvarying flow. Andrakich Eterin is a multimedia online experience where people can witness Nova Scotia living Gaelic culture, engage with its values and identity, experience its art traditions. I'm going the wrong way. Oh. Experience its art traditions, and interact with one another. Its core principle is to reflect and reinforce community and cultural values that have been maintained in Nova Scotia communities over generations. In Andrakich Eterin, they are transmitted through a 21st century medium. So you would have gone to the interactive map, picked Invernish or Inverness. You would come to explore their cultural traditions, their regional cultural traditions, which may be different from another region. Dance, song, stories. Picking song, you have the singer of the song is featured in photographs of him. A tradition bearer, you can change it to be Gaelic, English, or French. In Gaelic, you get the full text. In English and French, you would get a summary. The information is presented in context, so you get a description of what the story is, or the full story if it's in Gaelic. If you're a Gaelic learner, you can listen to the story, and you can also hear this, practice what the sounds of the language are with the words as it is written. One of the reasons that Andrakich Eterin is an audio-visual site is that not many Gaelic speakers read or write Gaelic. So it was really important that we could communicate through the site. Making it audio-visual was the way. Then you can listen to the song, and then you would also look at the person's biog or their patronymic. So the song is presented in full context. There also is a capability which is called Andrakich Vow, or the Living Bridge, and I've just rendered the site in its English format here so you could see that it is asking people to add their own voices, and they can add their own family stories and history and heritage, or their contemporary experience of living Gaelic culture. There was a huge infrastructure to deliver this, and it happened quite simply. We had a strategic plan for the Nova Scotia Highland Village Museum, and it was full of content that you could extract from that strategic plan and formulate it into applications for funding. We did that. We were very fortunate. The provincial government at the time offered Growing a High-Speed Future grant. And we knew nobody was going to understand what we were talking about, so we used the visual. We created a PowerPoint presentation as a movie with a narration, and we used that as our application form. We were lucky in that the panel administrator was Irish Gaelic. She got it right away. But she had to come back to us because she had questions that the panel had. They gave us half the money. We went to ACAP, which at the time were offering facilitation for community development, and they facilitated a full-day workshop where we drew in we identify key players in the community, the Gaelic community, and we brought them into this workshop. We talked about technology, the value that technology might have for the Gaelic language, culture-based learning. And from that, we emerged with a steering committee. It was the best steering committee I have ever worked with in my life. They were amazing. And with them, we developed this. This was done in collaboration and in partnership with members of the Nova Scotia Gaelic community for the Nova Scotia Gaelic community. We took the prototype once we had it finished, and we used it to apply for a Canadian Interactive Fund grant, which was quite a substantial grant. I think by the time we had all our partnership funding in, we were working with a budget of about $250,000. It was monumental. It had to be done in a year. We paid everybody, absolutely everybody. The tradition bearers, we employed, excuse me, secondary bilinguals, young Gaelic speakers who had come through the Bundesbauer program, and they went out into the field and they began collecting stories, and their language skills improved, and they're all working now at the Highland Villages, the Clesican, as interpreters. And so, anyway, how am I for time? Okay, so Androchich Etherin has demonstrated the potential to make considerable contribution to Gaelic cultural restoration initiatives taking place in Nova Scotia and other locales. It encompasses local, provincial, national, and international Gaelic communities. And we know this because we have Google Analytics, and every 2 months, we go in and we look and we interpret the figures and see how we're doing. And we load, every now and again, we have a strategy where we put on new stories. And Hamish, you put on one recently, and what was the number of people who... 18,000 people. And this was a story related to Willie Fraser's How He Learned to Dance. So, the multilingual site also holds benefit for cultural tourism in Nova Scotia through the transmission of an authentic Nova Scotia Gaelic experience. Transmitting Gaelic traditional culture, knowledge, and value in the tourism sector requires some serious questioning regarding the nature, the quality, the application, and ethical dimension before undertaking such an endeavor. Following World War II, Gaelic Nova Scotia became a source of exploitation for cultural tourism promotion. In the main, it was a tourism based on external interpretations that had come to Nova Scotia by way of the British Army and Victorian Romanticism. The past decade and a half has witnessed the passing of the Tartan-Attard visitor attraction and has turned itself to the Gael social aesthetics and art expression. It was a paradigm shift that was motivated by the Gaelic community themselves, particularly since the inception of the Office of Gaelic Affairs in 2004 and an exponential growth in community initiatives focusing on culture-based language renewal. We have this shift. After the launch of Androchich in 2012, we questioned whether or not there was potential for embedding cultural meaning in other ways. A collaboration with Seamus Watson seeks to research and verify native Nova Scotia Gaelic themes for potential product development. We opened our minds to the possibility of embedding meaning in products as another way of transmitting Gaelic cultural knowledge and values. We selected the Nova Scotia tourism market as a focus and as a challenge, and we currently are working to define the objectives for the research, which we've started on here. A great deal of work needs to be done to move this initiative forward, but in 2014 we tested the water somewhat. A lot of what we've done in the Gaelic community is taken a long time. This was a rather short-term exercise or test. Collaborating with the Nova Scotia Highland Village, Gaelic Affairs, and the Government of Nova Scotia and the Gaelic Council, we worked together to develop and deliver a 2015 course for NASCAD design students titled Designing for Cultural Restoration. The course introduces students to Gaelic language and culture and allows them to visually communicate their learning through the practice of designing. The outcome is a suite of posters that integrate imagery, symbolism, and bilingual text to visually communicate aspects of Nova Scotia Gaelic, specifically in the aspirations of Gaelic youth, from proverbs from the Gaelic wisdom system, and the storytelling and song traditions. The posters will be exhibited at Province House during Gaelic Awareness Month in May, and they will move to other venues. We've also designed a postcard package that will contain all of the images and will acknowledge the student as the artist. So we peak. Small fish is better than no fish at all. Morentang, thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. So if you could, so that we can move this along, if you could note your comments or questions, and at the end of our 4 panelists, we can get back to a discussion or answer some questions. Genevieve Allan Hearn now is going to focus on technology to promote arts and culture, along with some storytelling. Genevieve she grew up in the Annapolis Valley, graduated from an arts administration program at Acadia University, spent a year studying cultural events at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh. After 2 years teaching and traveling in Asia and 2 years completing a master's in arts, based community development at York University in Toronto, she returns home. So we talk a lot about students leaving, but as an example of coming back. She's worked she has worked for a range of cultural organizations in Nova Scotia. Her key interests include community mapping, as we'll hear here this afternoon, digital storytelling, and the link between cultural and community development. It's all yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Okay, so I'm here today to share with you my experiences with cultural mapping and digital storytelling in Kings County. So what is cultural mapping? It's a systematic approach to identifying, recording, classifying, and valuing a community's cultural assets. In essence, it's an asset map specifically for cultural assets. It celebrates our unique resources and contributions of artists and artisans in our regions. It enables participants of the cultural sector to self-organize. So it enables them to see what exists in the region, and then they can start to make connections. It raises awareness of cultural assets in the community, and it consolidates existing information. So the purpose is not to create new information, it's to take all of those bits of information that are out there that already pre-exist and to put it together to consolidate it on something like a one-stop shop for culture. Finally, it shows how resources are distributed in a geographical context. So really, it's a visual representation of arts and culture in your community. And from that visual, you can start to identify cultural hubs or clusters, and as well identify gaps. So I was the project manager for the Kings County Cultural Mapping Project that happened a few years ago, and I worked very closely with a 12-person advisory committee. And we came up with 3 pillars that drove our research. So the first one is that we wanted this project to remain community-driven. We wanted our information to come from the community, and we wanted the community to be involved in helping us guide the process, as well as have some input on what the end result might look like. So we involved them in 3 stages of the process. The first was information gathering or data collection. So we held a public engagement session where over 60 members of the community came, and we talked a little bit about cultural mapping. We asked the community, how would you like to define culture and set the parameters for this project? And then we led them in an activity where they brainstormed cultural assets in the region. They wrote it down on color-coded Post-it notes, and as you can see in the picture, they physically put this on a large map of Kings County, and that became our baseline data for the project. We then collated that with pre-existing resources, and then that gave us our database of over 500 cultural assets in the region. The second stage where they were involved is once we made the map, and the map was done by Ed Simmons and his students at the Center of Geographic Sciences. So once we had this map, before we launched it, we showed it to the community and we invited their feedback. We asked them how we might improve the user functionality, and we asked them how they saw this map benefiting the community. Finally, we invited some community members to help us in the beta testing process. So people were able to access the map before it was live, and they could play around with it and then fill out a survey and provide their feedback. Secondly, our second pillar was accessibility. We wanted this map to be accessible in two ways. We wanted it to be accessible to artists, and in order to do so, we did not charge a fee to be on the map. If artists self-identified themselves as being an artist, and they had a legitimate business or nonprofit organization, if they were registered, then they appeared on the map. It's as simple as that. But the second way that we wanted it to be accessible is to the community. So once this project was finished, we gifted it to the community, and it is owned by them. So we don't keep any of our information under lock and key. The cultural database is completely accessible. All people have to do is email me, and I would send out this information. Our third pillar is that we wanted the project to be inclusive. So we wanted as many voices as possible to contribute to the end result. So we gained community input, but at the end of each of these engagement sessions, we said, okay, who is missing? And we had quite a good cross-section of artistic disciplines, as well as age demographics, regional demographics. We even had quite a few francophones at our meetings, but what we did determine is that there was nobody there from the Aboriginal community, nor were there anyone from the African Nova Scotian community. And so we made a concerted effort to go into these communities and engage with them on one-on-one or small group consultations. So this is the cultural resource framework that guided our the process, or sorry, the criteria that we used. And so this is designed by Greg Baker, who lives in Toronto and works with authenticity, and he's used this in a number of projects he's done. He's also been in Annapolis Royal to talk about cultural mapping and cultural planning. And so we presented this to the community and said, does this make sense? We have these 8 criteria. There's cultural occupations, cultural organizations, spaces and facilities, intangible assets, cultural heritage, natural heritage, festivals and events, and cultural industries. And our response was that, yes, this makes sense, except for the cultural occupations piece, because in order to identify specific artists, if you're putting them on a map, then you often have to give their private addresses, and if they're not open to the public, then they didn't necessarily want to map their house. So we left that part out of the map, but everything else seemed to make sense. For intangible assets, those are those things that don't necessarily take up a physical space, but are important to our cultural milieu. So that might be stories, histories, traditions, memories. And so we decided to represent the intangible assets by way of digital storytelling, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes. So in the last engagement session, we asked the community, how do you see this benefiting the region? And so these were the responses that we got. People said that it will help to increase awareness of cultural resources. It will support networking and collaboration among cultural groups, leaves a lasting legacy of stories, promotes businesses, organizations, events, and entrepreneurs, and it's used as a baseline data for cultural planning by municipalities. So this is what the cultural map looks like today. It has gone through a couple iterations, and we'll go through one more as it transitions into the hands of the Municipality of Kings. It was being maintained by the Alliance of Kings Artists, but now it's going to the municipality. So it probably, the interface will change slightly, but this is what it looks like today. So we have these 7 layers, and this is a picture of all of the layers being shown all at once, but you can also isolate the layers. So if you just want to look at cultural facilities, then you can isolate that. You'll see that each criteria has its own color and icon. When you click on their icon, then a window of information pops up, and it tells you the address, the contact information, a link to their website if they have a website, and a short description. And then for the digital storytelling icons, when you click on it, a video pops up and you can play that video online. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about digital storytelling, and then I'll show you a digital story that's on the map. So digital storytelling is fusing the ancient art of storytelling with multimedia components. And those multimedia components would be the recording of the narrative, as well if you wanted to incorporate music or sound effects, you can do that, as well as visual components, so photos, you can use video footage, text, special effects. There's a digital storytelling center in Berkeley. That's the first center to be created, and they came up with these principles. They say everyone has a story to tell, and everyone has the capacity to tell their story, and in doing so we construct meaning through those stories. And finally, they say using a digital medium is a powerful way to reach people because you have the capacity to reach millions. So these are some examples of organizations that are using storytelling or mapping in creative placemaking. So I'll just make a quick mention of some of these and then I'll show you a digital story. So VANSDA, the Valley African Nova Scotia Development Association, has created a Matthew DaCosta trail, and so they've mapped out some important historical spots across the valley in African Nova Scotian history, and they have panels there that tell stories, and they've also recorded these stories so that you can get it digitally. Pier 21 is doing amazing work in digital storytelling. They have new immigrants taking digital storytelling workshops, and they're able to tell their story about coming to Canada and what it was like to be a new immigrant. Jane's Walks, many of you might know about this organization. They do walks in Halifax, as well as cities across the world. And it's a citizen-led walking project that's inspired by the work of Jane Jacobs. And so people can lead a walk and tell stories about the urban or natural landscape. And finally, I have a picture of cemetery walks or graveyard walks, which is growing in popularity, and it's a really fun way to engage with history and stories of the area. I'll also make a special mention of the work that the Age Advantage Association is doing here in Annapolis County. They're doing a cultural map, but it's much more comprehensive. And I know there is a live, the Bridgetown portion is live, but the rest of it is not quite there yet, but they're doing some wonderful work. Okay, so for the launch of the map, we collected 20 digital stories. So during the public engagement sessions, people indicated things like our railroad history or the Gaspereau, tubing in the Gaspereau River, those sort of things as cultural assets. And so we captured 20 stories, and I wish we could do 20 more. I wish we could do 100 more, but that's all we had time to do, that represented these assets.
I've been a chocolatier for over 25 years. My name is Nicole Evans, and I design and make cakes and chocolates of all kinds. I never looked at this as an art form, and I really didn't think of myself as an artist until 2004, when I, along with Terry Dreyhouse and Patrick Farrell, started doing guerrilla art. That is, we anonymously put up art pieces in the town of Wolfville, Nova Scotia. Why? To do art for the sake of art itself, to call attention to the need for public art, and simply for the fun of it. The Twig People, as the town named them, were 12 life-sized, anatomically correct gestural figures made out of twigs, stone, and twine, which we dropped off secretly in the middle of the night to prominent places in town. Each piece had an attached note giving its number, its name, and a message for the town. No one knew who we were, and difficult as it was, we kept that secret. The Twig people seemed to become citizens of Wolfville, from Barco being happily shifted into different positions, to the snow being carefully removed from around Willow, to the outrage at Holly's destruction. The community embraced the game, the art, and the sheer fun of a local mystery. Public art had become part of Wolfville. After the 12th Twig person, we did a major sculpture that took the three of us 4 months to complete. Her name was Sandy. Some people liked Sandy and others didn't, but there sure was a lot of talk about her. Discussions about art took place on the street. As for me, I felt totally out of my depth working on her. It was nothing like chocolate and nothing like the Twig people. But I was learning about shape, about form, about seeing differently. The week after we delivered Sandy, we were outed by a Halifax TV news team. Things died down after that. We had done 13 sculptures in 14 months, and when it was over, I felt lost. Then Terry came up with the idea of uncommon, common art. Again, art in a public place, easily accessible, over a dozen artists involved. A map to find the installations. Uncommon, common art is a kind of treasure hunt for art. I was really excited. I was ready for a new project. I decided I liked making art from found objects, so my first installation, with Pat's help, was Always a Way Out. 3 found doors on a hillside. All the installations were up from June to October. Uncommon Common Art was a success, and so were the doors, even making it to Google Earth. The following year, again with Pat's help, my contribution was reflective. 2 barn windows on end. The red window was backed in mirror, and the yellow one had plain glass. Pat and I collaborated on door 17 in the 3rd year of UCA. We mounted a door on a found staircase and put the whole thing on a plinth of mirror. It looked like it was floating. There'd sometimes be dozens of people a day coming by to look at it and photograph it. In 2011, we put up doorsteps. This one was by far the hardest to do. We went up 3 levels of staging to create it, and hoisting that final door up that final level was terrifying. Again, the piece generated attention, even to people asking to have their wedding pictures taken there. I have loved working on the installations, and we have started working on this year's project. Art has become comfortable in Kings County, and I've discovered a whole new part of myself. I'm still a little shy about thinking of myself as an artist, but that's okay. Because as Albert Hubbard said, art is not a thing, it's a way.
Just 3 quick snappers, Genevieve, if I can. The budget to do this project?
You want the actual number?
Well, or you, as you mentioned this morning, I think.
Amaze you. 5,500.
There you go. So that was, I thought that was worth mentioning. 2, who keeps it up to date? You mentioned that you had handed it off to the municipal unit.
Yeah, so I'll just... So it was the Alliance of Kings Artists. They have since dissolved, so we've handed it over to the municipality of Kings to maintain.
And they're responsible to maintain it
Yes.
then. And 3, the access to this?
Oh yes, if you want to access it, it's kingsculturalmap.ca.
Thank you. So our last panelist this afternoon is Marc Gauthier, and this will be a little different. He's going to focus on reusing infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier, as an art and culture hub. Marc Gauthier is the director of Moncton's International Francophone Film Festival and chair of the Aberdeen Cultural Centre that he's going to talk about today. A former school, somewhat like this, now housing multiple studios, cultural organizations.
My name is Nicole Evans, and I design and make cakes and
I thought I had
chocolates of all
competition. I
kinds.
didn't know if it was.
I never looked at
I was hearing that, or there we are. So the former school, if we could get back to it, houses multiple studios, as you'll see, cultural organizations, art galleries, and a daycare center. And if we can get this technology going.
Oh, the aperture. No problem.
There.
There we go. All right. Well, hello. I'm actually more nervous than I was this morning, so whatever you're doing differently, stop it. Okay? So, yeah, I'm chair of Aberdeen's board, and Aberdeen's in downtown Moncton, New Brunswick. I've been on the center's board for just over 2 years now. It gives me a certain amount of insight concerning the center's overall activities. However, it's through my day job that I've actually had the chance to see the center grow over the years. Our film festival has been headquartered there since the late 80s, and I've been a part of it since 2003. So, here you can see the center in its current incarnation on the left. To the upper right, unfortunately, the upper right, that was the original center. But in 1916, well, fire burnt it to a crisp, and it was swiftly rebuilt, luckily. So, let me see. We have a pretty complete backstory here, but I have my own version. Aberdeen High School was constructed originally in 1898. It was the city's first high school. It was named after Sir John Hamilton Gordon, first Marquess of Aberdeen and Temare, blah, 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 but also Governor General of Canada. He was in town to lay the cornerstone upon completion of the building. Marlene might be interested in hearing this, but he and his wife Ishbel actually came through this region and were very fond of the Maritimes in general and spoke fluent Gaelic and were noted for speaking Gaelic with many of the people who still spoke it in the region. Lady Marquess of Aberdeen and Temare, Ishbel, is actually, she founded the National Council of Women of Canada and also the Vaughan, the Victorian Order of Nurses. So I like to think the center is also named after her. But if anybody can tell me what the female of Marquess is, please tell me. The same thing, or? Marquesa, gracias. Okay. So, well, in 1916, the school received its trial by fire. It was rebuilt, of course. Over time, the great Canadian literary theorist Northrop Frye would graduate from the high school before it eventually became a French language elementary school. Anyway, in the 70s, it was decommissioned by the province, but by that time, a group of local artists had already started using the vacant third floor with permission from the district, of course. They weren't squatting or anything. So shortly thereafter, a daycare was added, and it's still the daycare center is still in the building. So by 1986, the tenants now included a dance studio, a theater, cafe, the daycare center, a contemporary art gallery, and a number of artist studios. Well, they got together and formed a cooperative called Centre Culturel Aberdeen, Aberdeen Cultural Center. So the cooperative ended up purchasing the building from the province for $1. So once they had their own building, they had a mission statement up here. Okay, so the goals were to offer its members and the community a permanent center for creation, production, training, and dissemination in the fields of art, culture, and education. 2, provide a stimulating working environment and well-adapted workspaces and various services, and to participate in promoting, developing, and producing artistic, cultural, and educational activities. So from that point on, the center was very active in the local arts community. A second art gallery was founded, a professional print studio opened up shop, and a few organizations, such as my own, the Film Festival, also a book editor, framing shop, a film production company, and a provincial arts lobby group, they all moved their offices into the center. I just can't guess as to the number of artists who came through the various studios over the year. I mean, dozens and dozens, really. So, I'd like to mention that the center was founded by Francophone artists, but it never actually adopted a mandate favoring French language artists or organizations. It simply maintained French as an operating language. Therefore, non-francophone or bilingual artists or groups have come through the center as tenants. For me, that's a very Moncton way of thinking. We tend to put I'd say fewer barriers between linguistic groups in certain regions in the province. So basically, if we have space available and you're creating or promoting arts and culture and you're comfortable with like 40 toddlers singing, screaming, playing in French just outside your window while you're working, then you can come. You can come and move in. So now while all this was going on, the building was growing older, and here are some of the needs we had. Needs. Okay. All right. Heating system, sprinkler system, renovations to enhance safety, all new electrical, an elevator. We were just using the stairs, and the multifunctional theater is on the 3rd floor. That was tough. Okay, for years and years, dragging sound equipment up there, it killed us, really. Masonry work, various insulation, waterproofing, new doors and windows, really simple renovations, basically. So, these needs had all been identified by the time the province sold it to the co-op. And I'm pretty sure that was one of the reasons they sold it for $1 to the co-op too. But luckily for decades, we had one man who was a jack of all trades, Bernard Leblanc. He kept everything running for years and years, and we owe him a debt of gratitude wherever he is now. Okay. So, here's a look at our old fuse box, which was the first to go when the renovation project started. So, here's what lit the fire under our butts. In 2010, the fire marshal gave us 6 months to begin renovations, or we were out. The place was going to be shut down, condemned. So, luckily, the center's administrators hadn't been wasting their time for years. The usual players from all 3 levels of government had been aware of the needs, but it took a lot more work to get all 3 to agree to contribute for the major renovation project. But the actual letter from the fire marshal was enough to at least give a sense of urgency that things needed to be done. So we especially needed to provide clear proof that the center was prepared to start a major fundraising campaign and a clear plan of how to go about it. So the cooperative was going to have to pay its fair share or just die trying. It was a do or die situation, basically. So we hired a firm and identified the individual costs. As you can see, there are plenty. Among the usual suspects like demolition, electricity, you'll note over $130,000 for tenant relocations. We learned the hard way that you shouldn't be shuffling people around while you're working in one area of the building. Just get everybody out, work on the building, and then everybody comes back in. If you're gonna start a project of this magnitude, don't try shuffling people about. It's just not worth it. Trust me. So there's also $98,000 under fundraising campaign. While that seems like a lot, a major part of our fundraising comes from auctions. And unless the artworks are simply donated to the center, 50% of the proceeds go back to the artists. So a large part of that amount has gone directly back into local artists' pockets. And if you add it all up, you get just over $4 million. All right. So, but to get to this point, we had to dissolve the co-op. For a number of reasons, we had to change the center from a cooperative to a nonprofit. There were just too many funding opportunities with the province and federal government that were just inaccessible as a co-op. It didn't matter much in our day-to-day operations as a cultural center for a few decades, but when we started this project, it just wasn't an option anymore. I don't have the specific details for that, but as I told people this morning, if you bring me your card later on, I can get the exact reasons why co-op would be at a disadvantage as opposed to a nonprofit organization when renovating. So let's break down the revenue sources here. Where did the funds come from? All right. The center is a heritage building, so it was eligible for funds on that basis from Heritage Canada. So, however, we needed to match that amount, 50-50. We had to act fast, so RBC came in with a loan. We're still paying back, but we're paying, so that's good. So together, that's 44%. We later raised another 17% through our fundraising campaign, mainly with private donations and auctions. The province's Regional Development Corporation added another 19%, with 13% from ACOA, and the city and other sources account for the rest. So, our fundraising campaign looked like that. The center's administrators, René Legere and Éric Cormier, they deserve tons of praise for bringing in large local companies aboard. Also, some fairly wealthy people donated a number of artworks for our auctions, and many artists, including several who work in the center, added their pieces to auctions as well. The more established ones simply donated their pieces, while others took their 50% stake. One important question that we have to answer on a regular basis is, why would the community help? Why should members of the community help out a cultural center? What's in it for them? Well, many things, actually. There are under a dozen arts and cultural centers in New Brunswick, but we feel that Aberdeen has a unique role to play. A large number of kids come through our daycare centers, which includes preschoolers, but also 6 to 12-year-olds who have their own after-school center on the same floor, which houses my festival, the Fry Literary Festival, as well as a new gallery space. I'm not originally from Moncton myself, but I have tons of friends who grew up there, and the first contact with the visual arts of the non-macaroni glitter and white glue type, and dance and other art forms was from spending an hour and a half every single day. Well, no, Monday to Friday, actually, not weekends. Yeah, an hour and a half every school day in a place where all this art and culture was happening. We're talking about a place where organizing a film screening, story time with a local author, or things of that sort, they can be organized in a matter of hours. Of course, I prefer to organize them in a matter of days, but yes, indeed, we have to organize them in a couple of hours sometimes, but we can do it. The impact of this cannot be quantified. I find it lucky that there are still many parents who want their children to be exposed to the arts, and I think we have something special going on, really, and so do they. That's one point that's not neglected when we're raising funds. We bring it up quite a bit. So next is the heritage factor. The infrastructure notwithstanding, the building already looked great from the outside, but by the mid-20th century, well, laminate flooring, painted moldings, carpet, stuff like that. So, however, a few elements from 1916 were still around, like these large wooden inner doors on the main floor. Those prove that they really made fine-looking buildings back in the day. So we were very vocal in our desire to uncover the original beauty of the center. Even if it cost more, we really wanted to bring back what the center once had. And I think a few people really are against that, honestly. So I've mentioned the educational factor, but as far as our cultural and artistic vocations, well, they spoke for themselves, really. At the time, 1 and now 2 international festivals are housed in the building with all the press and all the press that those entail. There are also 2 other festivals that operate at a Canadian level, and by the time the renovations came about, the Escowette Theatre had become so successful that after more than 20 years at Aberdeen, they acquired their own building just down the street. So members of the building were very active, but for the few years preceding the renovations, they'd become unable to hold many of their events within the center, and that mitigated the building's visibility and use by the community. So event organizers made it clear, like all these partners, that once the infrastructure was sound, the concerts, gallery openings, book launches, conferences, and workshops, well, they'd all come back to the building, and in a big way, too. So as for this point, all these services under one roof, well, while your child is taking dance lessons, you can check out a movie, visit 2 art galleries, and 2 open art venues. You can get your picture taken. You can get that picture framed. Just have it developed quickly, I don't know. Anyway, or have a fine meal at our fantastic French bistro that opened just in December. I mean, the center is an open space where people in the community can freely move and see what's happening. These are all important points, but what is fascinating is that nothing in the 20-plus years of the center managed to let the community know about it and its value, more than the actual fundraising campaign that not only allowed it to survive, but to thrive in a way we just couldn't have foretold. Let's get this right here. Investments in infrastructure. I mean, the sheer undertaking of these renovations brought so much attention to the center and its facilities that a new diverse crowd started coming to the center. Doctors and lawyers who were introduced to the center through our auctions now dine there regularly and view new art coming in at the same time. Young art students come to gain perspective and see what their contemporaries are up to as well, and maybe even secure a spot in an art gallery's programming. Every type of person comes to the various talk show recordings, concerts, film screenings, and more. I mean, enough can't be said about the center's administrators' ability to communicate the needs of this large community investment. I mean, we're in a climate where every tax dollar is scrutinized beyond, reason, beyond all sanity, really. Everybody wants a maximum value for their dollar, But, I mean, in such a climate, hardly any vocal criticism could be heard regarding the project, honestly. The message got through. It was and remains a worthwhile investment for the people of Moncton. So, the project also proved that the city of Aberdeen could The project also proved that to the city that Aberdeen could handle large undertakings. So when it was looking for a community partner for a new festival celebrating the Acadian national holiday, it came to Aberdeen. Since then, the Acadie Rock Festival, produced out of Aberdeen Cultural Centre, has organized 2 fantastic editions, showcasing not only contemporary Acadian acts and artists, but Anglophone artists as well, which is a very Moncton thing to do, honestly. So here are some images of some events. This one on the left is actually not at Aberdeen. This one was taken down by the Petitcodiac River during the Acadie Rock Festival last year. And yeah, that is me emceeing right there. Yeah, shameless self-promoter I am. So, here in the corner, that's a Super 8 film screening on the main floor during my festival. Again, shameless self-promotion. And here's a concert on the 3rd floor in our new multifunctional theater, which was just renovated last year as phase 2 of our renovations. So here's some more. All 3 of these events are actually from my festival because we take the best pictures. So I'm not trying to promote it in any way. We were really researching and looking for photos of the center, and ours were just the best. Hey, go figure. So, yeah, here, this is the 2nd floor. Again, this is another angle of the 2nd floor. Film screening, artist conference. And this is the Galerie Sans Nom, the no-name gallery on the main floor. So, to this. This is outside of my office. It looked pretty drab about 6 years ago, and now it looks fantastic. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and it brings us close to 3 o'clock, but we'll always take a few questions. I don't think there's anything, I think it's a break coming up, so we do have time. So there was an example of how you can take arts and culture off the sidelines and anchor it in community. So if we go back to our original placemaking, you can see different ways of how we can use arts and culture to find its proper place within community and how we can drive our communities forward using arts and culture. Questions. So I think we have a microphone so everybody will hear the first question.
Hi.
To anybody in particular, or?
Yes, just anyone who wants to reply. But really, it's a statement. Having just done the coordination of the upskilling festival, I note that with some rare occasions, these kinds of skills that we had there, like making a chair or doing a quilt, are often not included in arts and culture, but often the quilt will be exhibited, or the chair, but not the person doing it. Now, there are some things like in Cape Breton where they'll have a quilting bee, or singing and doing carding, so that is one exception. But I'd just like to throw in an idea that increasing awareness of including these particularly artists who are creating culture and society from scratch. And the most ancient origins of our culture and our economy started with being able to nap a piece of rock and make a sharp edge. And it still, sharpening your tool, like the way we started the upskilling festivals, a counselor talked about sharpening his tools, and then I brought out a knife that I've carried in my pocket since 1970, given to me by my mother on the model of my father's knife, that I've sharpened very carefully over all that time and kept. It's not throwaway, it's functional. I use this knife, it's not a toy. But the point is honoring that component as well, and consciously including it. I didn't see any of that in the Aberdeens. Maybe you didn't focus it, but I didn't see any of that. And also bring in the idea of how this is contributing directly to the basis of the economy. Because from my perspective, that is the very start of the economy, doing it yourself locally. And so, does anyone want to address that?
I could mention something. I didn't even... Yeah, I barely even touched the surface of the actual art that's taking place there, just because my reason for being here was talking about the center itself, its renovation project, and its place in the community. But no, I totally agree with you. There's so much space for artists, artisans, people who make things in general. I assure you that every type of creation has come through this center. We had a huge wood shop for years and years in there. Tons of things came out of there. Movie sets were built in the basement. I couldn't possibly go over every type of creation in the center through my presentation here, because it's really more of a general overview. But I agree.
Fantastic.
Sure.
I'm not sure if this addresses your question, but it sparked a few thoughts in my head. And we seem to be in a period of experience economies in which authenticity is really an important element. Gilmore and Pine, who are graduates or who work at the Harvard Business School and have made a number of publications, have a book called Authenticity. They have one, Experience Economies. They also have one, Authenticity. And they point out how important it is for consumers to experience authentic experiences. So in the terms of a culture generating aspect, sometimes the economic advantage is not initially apparent, but it is all working towards authenticating what it is that the experience might be, and apparently also, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Just to add to that piece, from my experience, and I don't know if that's what you're making reference to, and I think I'm building on what you're saying, but living wharves, for example, there's been a project down in certain areas where you have fishermen, you use the living wharf, the people working there as a tourism project to get people to see how fishing is done. There's living villages. I know the Acadian Village, they have different workshops on site of the boat building in the earlier days. There's the Festival de la Parole, I know, in our end. That's the storytelling festival that they have. There's artists that are going into playing music into restaurants that are floating from place to place. To me, that's all. Your idea would be part of that, except you're looking maybe at certain trades or certain fields of expertise. Using the same rationale, seems to me that you could benefit from some type of mechanism to show that in our communities. Yeah, good idea. Question?
I guess I have a comment and other comment or question. First of all, I'd just like to say that over the course of the conference so far, I deeply appreciate the opportunity to hear from the Mi'kmaq community particularly, and I thank you for your storytelling, and it's something that for me personally, it's just such a tremendous listening opportunity that I feel does not happen often enough in enough forums. And I think that's something that needs to happen more often. And something just that a while back at a conference with a similar theme to this back in 2005 was Genuine Progress Index Atlantic hosted a Rethinking Development conference. And we had representatives that came far and wide from all over the world. And some of them included Mi'kmaq elders, as well as Mohawk and other First Nations representatives. And I can tell you that the time that was slotted for various discussions was never enough for the amount of story that people deeply appreciated. And basically what I'm trying to say is, I've been missing out for a really long time to hear these stories. And I think other people feel that too. And also when it comes to honorariums and things like that that are lacking when storytelling is happening, I think that's going to change. And I know I would certainly line up to buy tickets if it were appropriate or whatever the case may be. And then finally, just with the example of the Aberdeen Cultural Centre, I think it's fantastic, and something that has been a woven theme through this whole conference as well is the development of community hubs. And something that I also learned from the project that was about engaging youth around expressing their stories, around access to transportation, particularly in rural communities. That was another project with GPI Atlantic, Youth Ride Research and Action Project, was learning, what it's like for them to live in rural communities and not have access to get to the places and spaces that they want to go to and to connect with the people that they connect with as young people, as little people, growing up in isolated communities. So one thing that came out was that, right now, in a lot of cases, parents are the bus drivers. If you're lucky enough to have a vehicle in your driveway or whatever the case may be. And the other part of this equation is that when youth want to get to the places they want to go to and the parent is the bus driver, the parents are often hanging out at a Tim Hortons or something like that because there's nowhere for the parent activity, I guess, to happen at the same time. So like examples like the Aberdeen Cultural Centre or a rec center or a library and stuff like that. Right now we have amazing examples here in Annapolis Royal, like this building here, the other center we were at last night for the banquet, and other buildings that can be repurposed, might be next to a field or something where soccer games happen and stuff like that. And what kind of activities and things like making chairs or whatever the case may be could be happening at the same time as like the minor soccer game or whatever that the kids need to get to enjoy, the dynamics of working as teams and such. Thanks.
Any comments from any of the panelists? There you go.
Allan, by the way, I had a difficult night and morning because I do share when I can, and I'd heard a negative racist comment come back to me last night. Not about this at all. It was something else that I had shared, a different event, from somebody who didn't see the, a Mi'kmaq voice as a necessary part of what they were doing, and there was somebody who didn't agree, and a racist comment came back to me, and I thought, wow, it's just, what they say that it goes underground sometimes, and so it just kind of knocked me off last night, and it's hard to know when you're a part of something authentically, and anyway, it's been really lovely to share here and to be able to open with a song and hopefully close tomorrow with a song, and I feel good about that. But there's just so much that I think Canadians haven't understood about the history of the land. and there's still a lot of negativity that you come across. And so it's really wonderful to be able to hear after sharing like this and just taking a leap of faith that I belong here, that for you to say that you know that you've missed out on a lot of other First Nations stories. So I'm really glad that there's a few people who would like to hear more First Nations stories. So thank you for that. I just wanted to say that.
Maybe one last question. I think we're running a little bit over time.
Yes, the videographer gets the last word. Haha. All right. I really appreciated, by the way, turning off the camera. Thank you. Actually, seriously. So I'm a NASCAD graduate. I made a film years ago on Willie Francis Fraser called God Bless My Feet, which is still up in Cape Breton. And I have a daughter who studies Mi'kmaq songs and Inuit culture and different within her school at the Shambhala School in Halifax, and they bring in elders from the different local traditions to teach, and it's been a great education for me. And I feel that one of the greatest things we can do as artists is to connect our sense of lineage to a place, to our children and to ourselves. And so I just wanted to perhaps ask all of you for just one little bit of personal insight into what arts and culture maybe not has done for you, but what sort of aspirations you may have for all of our local prosperity. That's not exactly a question.
That's a great way to finish off, though. That's closing comments from our panelists.
Well, I had the good fortune, from a personal perspective, I had very good fortune to travel a great deal, have lots of opportunities as an artist, a designer, a teacher, and I was always thankful for my education that I had at NASCAD. When I went abroad, I had something. I didn't quite able to describe it that was different, and I learned more and more and more, and then I thought, right, I've got enough now. I'm going back home, and I'm going to try to take that gift that I had and go back home and exercise with that. And I was back, I was away for 28 years, and first year I sort of settled in, and then I saw a advertisement for the Nova Scotia Highland Village Museum in Iona, and I thought, that's it. That's the door opening. One door closes and another door opens. And so I went through that door, a big learning curve to learn and understand what I know now, and a great deal more than I need to know about the Gaelic community in Nova Scotia and the value that brings to Nova Scotia culture. And I want to continue to work in that area because I think it's very important for the Nova Scotia identity and authenticity, and ultimately for our economy.
I have so many answers to that question. First of all, I would love, in a perfect world, for us to change the discourse about culture and not talk about it in capitalistic economic framings, but talk about it as a social good and value it as that. I also think I would also love for artists to play well together, because we've created an environment that's very competitive. They're often fighting for money, for funding, for sponsorship dollars. Organizations are fighting for volunteers. And so if we can find a way to play well together. And finally, on my grand wish list, I would like the community to put their money where their mouth is and consider how we consume culture. And I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but I bet if I had a random selection of people in the room, most people would say the last time they consumed culture was at the Cineplex watching a Hollywood movie. So it would be wonderful if we started to support local artists and artisans.
I've lost a little track of how that question had started, but I thought it was also about what had inspired you or your connection to art. And mine was just simply, I just fell into loving poetry and music and just creating all of a sudden by myself as a young child. And so I can't imagine my life without those mediums. And so I developed the skills, but the art started as medicine for myself. And then later, as you develop the skill, then you know how to work that to help other people by creating things and giving it back to the community. And so I will agree that it would be lovely to see more community people supporting local performance artists and visual artists whenever you can. And so I see a lot of that in Annapolis and in Bear River, and I'm really, really happy with our local support of arts.
I believe your question was, how does art affect us personally? How did it affect us? Was that? No, I'm sorry. Could you? Basically, yeah, because I don't know. Relates to the economy. Well, I think I've spoken enough about the economy, and I do like your comment. I do like your comment about appreciating culture for culture's sake and finding some way to quantify it that's not necessarily dollar-based. Culture for me, honestly, like I'll speak through the person who I am in my day job, the director of a film festival. I came into that job slowly but surely as of 2003. At the time, I had a diploma in transportation logistics, and I was studying translation. And I took a summer job that was supposed to last 2 months at a film festival, and I never left. I've been working there full time. For most of that, I was paid full time, but I worked at it. And as far as the arts are in my life, I mean, if I were to choose the art form that affected me the most in my life, it would have to be music. Film for me came a bit as an afterthought, but after working in it for 12 years and after working basically at the logistical end at the beginning and then working my way up to director, I've developed a deep appreciation for it, and I've found basically that we had a niche at our festival, and it was to try to curate and to create new young talent in town. Because the Acadian film industry is basically based around documentaries that are made for television, which have their place. But there's very, very little fiction that is done. And there are Acadian producers in New Brunswick, and we did not want to come and step on their toes in any way. So in the last few years, I've really been pushing forward these various little projects that cost very little, really, to try and create new short fictions. And for the past 3 years, I'm happy to say we've helped newer filmmakers make an average of 15 new films a year in town. We've sent younger filmmakers off to various festivals. We've helped them participate in various things. This week I'm going to announce that we got another of our films going to Telefilm's market screenings in Cannes for the 3rd year in a row. Yay. Anyway, being a promoter of that talent and, pushing people who I know who work in various art forms to actually go and step out of their comfort zone into film. Photographers, graphic designers, musicians, these are the people we make filmmakers out of. That is something that has affected me so much. The gratitude from those people is one thing, but just seeing that little piece of us and our locale being selected in various festivals, slowly but surely over the past couple of years, that just fills me with pride. I love it. That's really gotten to me these last few years, and that's where I'm headed. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life, basically.
Thank you. Okay, so that will put an end to this session. I think we could probably have another session on how to cultivate arts and culture development in our communities. I think there's fine examples out there. Of course, I'm talking as a university president. Some communities are maybe a little bit more fortunate than others. If you happen to have a university campus with a theater and an art gallery, you already have some infrastructure to build along with. But the next piece, and I think this is where, in many cases, not only arts and culture, we don't focus enough time, is on processes and strategies of how we move sectors forward. And maybe in this case here, same thing. Maybe we should put more of our, well, there was fine examples here, but the next step is that we should focus our energies on strategies and processes of how we're going to move this forward. And it's going to take collaboration, it's going to take partnership, it's going to take, and it's not going to have, it has to go beyond the people involved in arts and culture. It has to go to at the municipal level with partners, you know, a different level. So anyway, we've gone over time. Thank you for your attention, and I'm sure the panelists are going to be here a little bit longer.